Oh, you think darkness is your ally?
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
Don't tell me you've got a catchphrase.
The Creator formed us on the second day, the day He made the heavens.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
It was not our place to interfere, yet we chose to try and help mankind.
This whole mess is my fault. I've been so blinded by rage, I thought I had no choice.
Still, we taught mankind all we knew of creation.
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
There is something fascinating about the way the human mind remembers. Not because memory is perfect, in fact, we know it's not, but because it is strangely selective. You can forget the name of someone you met yesterday, yet the smell of fresh-cut pine can transport you to your grandfather's workshop 30, 40 years ago. The opening notes of an old hymn can tighten your throat before you even recognize the melody. A photograph tucked inside an old Bible can bring back emotions you thought had long since disappeared. It isn't as though you consciously searched for those memories. They found you. Modern neuroscience tells us that this isn't accidental. Our senses, particularly smell, have direct connections to the emotional centers of the brain. Before your rational mind has time to explain what's happening, your body has already formulated a response. Your breathing changes, your pulse shifts. You feel peace, grief, fear, joy before you've had time to even analyze why. The body remembers what the conscious mind often forgets. Carl Jung found that deeply significant. He believed that beneath the personality we consciously present to the world lies another layer of ourselves, a hidden territory he called the shadow. The shadow isn't simply the evil within us, it is everything we have pushed out of conscious awareness. Certainly, it includes our pride, envy, anger, fear, and selfishness. But it also contains forgotten strengths, abandoned dreams, creativity we were told was foolish, compassion we learned to suppress, and parts of ourselves that never truly disappeared, they were simply buried. Think about how much your personality was chosen, and how much of it was built in response to the world around you. Maybe you stopped asking questions because your curiosity got mocked. Maybe you stopped trusting because you were betrayed. Maybe you became the funny one, the quiet one, the responsible one, the angry one, because somewhere along the way, those identities kept you safe. Eventually, the mask became so familiar, you forgot that it was ever a mask at all. The remarkable thing is that the shadow rarely stays hidden forever. It reveals itself in unexpected ways. You overreact to a harmless comment. You distrust someone you've just met without knowing why. You avoid certain places or people or songs because they awaken something uncomfortable. Often we assume the problem exists entirely outside of us, when in reality something inside has been touched. The reaction itself isn't the truth, but it is a clue. It points to something waiting to be understood. That makes me wonder whether memory itself serves a greater purpose than simply recalling information. Perhaps memory is one of God's gifts for preserving identity. Throughout Scripture, remembering is never treated as a passive activity. Israel was constantly commanded to remember. They stacked stones beside the Jordan River so that future generations would ask why they were there. They celebrated feasts that forced them to relive God's faithfulness. Even the Eucharist begins with the command, "Do this in remembrance of me." The biblical world understood something modern people often forget. If you control what a people remember, you shape who they become. Maybe that's why one of the strangest passages in the Bible has never disappeared. See, in Genesis 6, it's only a few verses long, yet for thousands of years it has provoked endless debate. It speaks of the sons of God, the daughters of men, the Nephilim. Entire libraries, it seems, have been written trying to explain those mysterious verses. Were the sons of God fallen angels, the descendants of Seth, ancient kings, faithful rulers? Christians alone have debated those questions for centuries. And I don't intend to settle them here. But regardless of which interpretation you find most convincing, one fact remains impossible to ignore. God preserved the passage. Out of everything that could have been omitted from Scripture, those verses remained. They survived a flood, kingdoms, exile, Roman Empire, 2,000 years of Christian history, and they stand there like an ancient monument refusing to be ignored. Whether they describe supernatural rebellion, human corruption, or something in between, they remind us that the Bible does not sanitize history simply because history makes us uncomfortable. That is profoundly different from the way we usually tell our own stories. We edit, we soften, we explain away. We remove details that no longer fit the person we've curated ourselves to be. Families do it, nations do it, religions do it, and certainly individuals do it. We quietly rearrange the past until it becomes easier to live with. We tell ourselves that what we don't examine no longer has influence over us. Yet does it? Jung would argue that whatever remains hidden does not disappear. It simply continues operating beneath the surface. Scripture repeatedly warns that forgotten sins become repeated sins. Hidden idols eventually become public disasters. The things we refuse to confront seldom lose their power merely because we've stopped talking about them. Perhaps that's why the Bible is so brutally honest. Abraham lies, David commits adultery and murder, Peter denies Christ, the disciples misunderstand Jesus time and time again. Maybe Genesis 6 belongs in that same category of uncomfortable truths. Not because it answers questions, it really doesn't, but it refuses to let us pretend that reality has always been simple. It stands as a reminder that history contains mysteries. The world described in Scripture is often stranger than the world we imagine, and that God was apparently more interested in preserving difficult truths than he was in providing easy explanations. For most of us, reality is something we inherit rather than investigate. We inherit ideas about history, religion, science, politics, ourselves, even about God. We accept them because they fit comfortably inside the world we've already constructed. Anything that challenges that construction is usually dismissed before it's examined. We call it strange, irrational, conspiracy, outdated, impossible. Not because we've necessarily followed the evidence wherever it leads, but because it threatens the framework we've spent a lifetime building. Jung believed that whatever we bury in the human soul continues influencing us from the shadows. Scripture suggests something remarkably similar about history. Forgotten truths have consequences. Hidden rebellions leave scars. The things we choose not to remember often become the very things that shape us, without our permission. So perhaps the next time the smell of rain stops you in your tracks, the next time an old song awakens in a memory you thought was gone, or the next time you stumble across one of those strange biblical passages you've always hurried past, don't rush to explain it away. Sit with it. Ask questions. Become curious. Because the greatest mysteries are rarely found in abandoned temples, classified government files, or the unexplored corners of the ancient world. And sometimes they've been sitting on the pages of an open Bible for thousands of years, waiting for someone willing to ask why they were preserved in the first place. So here's the question. If you're willing to admit that you've carefully edited your own memories, and history itself has been curated by every civilization that has ever existed, then how certain are you that the reality you experience every day is the whole story, and not simply the version of reality someone taught you to believe as safe? What happens when the symbols we trust to guide us begin to reveal something darker? Something fractured beneath the fabricated image of our self-made image to fake until we make it. Beneath every noble idea, every heroic aspiration, there exists an inversion. Through ancient esoteric frameworks and the timeless tension of oppositional forces, we are confronted with the unsettling reality that wisdom and corruption often wear the same face. Pride masquerades as innocence, manipulation as power. In the silent architecture of the human psyche, these darker archetypes emerge as distorted echoes of our own nature, revealing that the greatest mysteries may not lie in the stars above, but in the abyss within. To discuss this and more is our guest. She is the archetype artist, shadow seeker, and esoteric archivist. Maja, welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Appreciate it. So as we get started, can you tell the audience where they could find you and what you've been working on, if you have your own website?
Sure, yeah. My name is Maja Daou, and I'm a practicing witch. I have been witching it up since I was about 15, and I'm pretty old, so it's been a minute. And I do a lot of stuff all over the place. So there's a lot of podcasts I don't have listed on my website, but my website is witchofthedawn.com. And that has a lot of my books and films I've made and some of the stuff I do. But I am not on social media, so don't look for me there. I got off due to, a lot of issues with just censorship and I help a lot of people. So there was monitoring happening in my inbox, which I felt like was not fair to people that I was trying to help with serious problems, getting weird. So I chose to just leave social media, but whatever, if you're on there and it's working for you, go nuts. But yeah, you can find me on my website, witchofthedawn.com. Oh, no worries. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know about all that. That's a lot of stuff. What I was thinking about starting with is when we're talking about some of these darker things throughout history and through some of our more ancient ancestors, they seem to have been interested in things that we are now finding prevalent today. And I'm talking about things like Nephilim, Rephaim, etc. These men of renown, these giants, whatever they may be called. And so when you're looking at that, how do you parse those? Are we talking about possible real beings? Are we talking about maybe some kind of psychological descent? What do you do with all that?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. We are talking about all of the above, right? I feel like, especially with historical, esoteric things, one of the things which is kind of cool that maybe you and your listeners will enjoy is you can turn a phrase a million ways. And as you go through these stories and representations, they are real, symbolic, metaphors, they're all of the above, right? So they can hit these multiple categories. So to get specific in my work, I talk a lot about the Rephaim, right? So, and there's so many scholarly works on like, what were these a real race of giants? Like, well, there's quite a bit of evidence to the effect that maybe there were gigantic people. I really like the book Genesis 6:1 by Stephen Quayle. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, great book, great book. You know, he has so much research in there talking about evidence of this. So it's quite probable that's accurate. And then they're also described in different texts, which I look at as these like underworld beings that are in the realm of death, which is in tons of the pagan literature, and that they actually serve at like they're these ancestors of humanity, right? That lived before us and, you know, have memories or connections to our past, somehow filling in these secrets of what is a human being. So they also then in other literature represent metaphorically these kind of, you know, kind of like the Titans, where they're our atavistic impulses, our instincts, these kind of raw nature that lives inside of humans, and they get represented by these, you know, natural things like violence, sex, birth, death, all of these more gritty things that we as human beings on the planet Earth experience.
Right. And on that, one of the things that's interesting within, you know, the corpus, I mean, we're talking like the Ugaritic text, we're talking, you know, ancient bell cycle stuff and documents, the Book of Enoch. And there's so much literature from what has been classified as the Second Temple period in the Levant. That's kind of the big umbrella. They were really examining some of these ideas as them being real things. And it's kind of an interesting idea, but when you look at it and interpret it through a psychological descent, what kind of things are we looking at when we're like confronting those darker impulses that may explain the more psychological, whereas we were just talking about the potential for physical too?
Absolutely, yeah. The psychological descent is like very common, right? This is the underworld journey of the hero, the first one being Inanna, who was the woman that goes to confront her sister, right? In a lot of the mythological or esoteric texts, there's brothers or sisters, right? So we get Osiris and Set, right? Is like a perfect example. And these are Osiris being the like visible one, that's the good guy, and then Set is the dark one, the bad guy, right? So this is a very common trope. And as we do the psychological descent of the dismemberment of our ego, going into like, who am I? What is all this? You know, where you get the video effects of the person like blurring and going into waves. That is what is known as the disintegration process of ego when we undergo an ego death. So that's what shadow work predominantly focuses on, is trying to integrate all the parts of ourself that we try to hide from our conscious awareness, that we'll either project, get rid of, or like, ooh, that's not good, I don't want to look at that, la, 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 you know. And then it also goes deeper. I like to look at some of the pagan sources rather than just the pop culture Jungian shadow work that is like, oh, tell me about your father or whatever. No, this is like, you live in a body that's an animal that's breathing and dies. Like, that's like, you really got to get into that depth of what are we? You're going to have to look at, there's so much in you that you can't bring to your conscious awareness. Like, that a lot of yogis and initiates study of, like, controlling your breath, controlling your heart rate, controlling your pooping. Like, these are our, you know, autonomic nervous system level things that shadow work can get into too. Not just suppressed childhood memories, but like literally the unknown in the universe level of shadow work.
Yeah, the goal is always to go deeper with shadow work.
As deep as you can.
We spend enough time right here. Yeah. One of the things is the existence of many symbolic systems that explore these ideas. Somebody can use Aleister Crowley's Thoth deck, for example. That one's got some real good hermetic stuff going on that you can look at, not just like the Sephiroth, but like the Qliphoth. You can actually then flip around and look at some of the darker stuff, the inversions. And so, with the design to help with ego death and without, our own, the way that we manipulate ourselves and stuff like that. And I'm curious from you and your perspective with using this symbolic system that we're talking about, how do you see the transformation of that kind of wisdom, digging deeper in the shadow and turning that into control?
Control is a hard word, isn't it? Yes. I mean, I feel like a lot of shadow work is about releasing control and seeing how there just is death and darkness. And that is something that is so much larger than you. But I do feel strongly that, and one of the things I advocate, which is kind of all I've got in shadow work, is to raise your awareness and perception of it, right? So maybe not control, but what we can see, we can deal with a little better, okay? So like, for the example, it's the difference between driving in the dark and turning on your headlights. So you'll be able to just navigate it much better if you have an awareness of like, oh, this is this kind of energy, and I'm going to have to navigate this, right? So maybe we can't control those darker energies and chaotic forces, but you can surf, So it's kind of, you get into that place of getting to get a feel and recognition of those, kind of like, you'd be surprised. You can navigate very difficult things with like a little training. Like, it's the difference between someone having CPR training and someone not having CPR training. Like, that's a pretty big difference though, in those moments, right? So control, yeah, for sure. There's some control there, but it comes through awareness and perception. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's the kind of control I'm talking about. Taking control of ourselves, not being controlled by ourselves.
I mean, it's really a struggle though. Like, we can do everything right and then still like struggle in that department for sure, depending on the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, see, something that I was thinking about too is basically, across myth, right? Across things like psychology, things, metaphysical philosophy also. There's this journey inward that always seems to be necessary, but it's fraught with danger. And so I'm wondering, why do you think confronting that unconscious mind can feel so threatening?
Because it feels like death, right? It always goes to death. Big surprise. It's the number one fear, right?
Yeah,
so, or like an end, or that something's over, or that it's like you don't get another chance, right? Well, I always think about this. I don't know if you ever saw that Roald Dahl movie about the BFG, the giant. Oh, it's really cute. But anyway, there's a scene in it where the giant like collects, not to give spoilers, but he collects like dreams. And there's this one nightmare that he says is the worst nightmare. And the nightmare, he explains, he goes, no forgiveness ever. As being like the worst one, right? So it's kind of this threat of no redemption, no do-overs, that finality, that severity, and so when we have to confront that kind of feeling of like, no more, nothing, right? The nothing, it really just goes right to the existential dread of the ending.
Yeah, since since we're basically talking about death, I thought let's talk about the card that you named for your deck, the Murderer. Why did you particularly choose that for basically kind of like because death is already the inversion of life. So you've taken death and you've inverted it down a grade.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Death is like a natural event, right? That occurs. But the inversion to make death unnatural is when we incur it to happen, right? I mean, it's everything is natural that happens in nature. But with the murderer, that's someone trying to control death, right? Or take control or power over that. They still can't control their own death, right? So they think that somehow they have power or control over death by imposing it on another, even when they, to me, it's like such a deep fear of death that they think somehow if they do it, that is where that control comes from, right? It's just a misperception, a misunderstanding, I feel like, you know?
Yeah, so we take basically murder, and that's like the deprivation. You're taking away the life of another person. You know, when you were talking, it reminded me of a serial killer that I had been looking into pretty deep, John Wayne Gacy. Yes. And so when you look at John Wayne Gacy and then you look at the murderer, your card here, there's kind of like this man had a curated identity, right? That was performative. I mean, he put on performances. He was the clown, the guy that everybody was like, yeah, this is a good dude. But at the same time, he's a completely inverted individual where he's doing things and killing people, right?
He's fully split.
And so I think that's something interesting.
Into, right? He has completely the dark him that's hidden from the world, and then this outward seemingly positive identity that he presents. Yeah. It's wild but that happens pretty often with humans, right? So the integration of ourselves into one being that isn't split or fractured like that, right, is kind of the goal of the shadow work in order to prevent those kinds of behaviors from going to such an extreme polarity.
Yeah, and on that, what does it mean for a person? Like, you know, not a psycho or sociopath. I mean, just people, not the extreme examples of human depravity, but what does it mean for a person to psychologically or spiritually, whatever, invert an archetype? And how can understanding those inversions reveal where one's life may be out of balance?
Sure.
Then,
I mean, we got to look at what we're hiding or what other people are hiding and see that through compassion, right? Understand like how to address it, be trauma informed. So for example, someone may be fractured with their sexuality. They may be hiding they're gay. This is like a very standard thing that happens to lots of people, right? So then they're going to have and develop an identity that is fractured or separated, and they split into these different personas that then they have to switch in different circumstances. So they compartmentalize, and then they can't have integration of those personas with specific people. Like for some of my friends, it's like their parents, right? So this is like rough because you have to, with someone that should be very intimate, someone who should know you very well, your persona gets split and you can't. So in order to deal with that, sometimes it's not safe to be integrated in front of people, right? So if you have split your persona and have a shadow self out of protection, for example, right? Maybe you're not safe to show that to another person. Now you're going to have to be able to integrate that yourself and know that that's part of yourself and raise it to your awareness so that it doesn't get stuck into a guilt and shame category. But you can have self-compassion and know this isn't a safe place for me to show this part of my persona, but I accept it and love it in myself, right? So we can still feel comfortable entering our inversions and give them healthy expressions. So too, maybe you have violence in your shadow persona, right? For whatever reason. Violence is natural, happens in nature all the time, right? Watch a nature show, a lot of violence. So you can maybe look for a healthy expression of that, like go do martial arts or sports or something that will enable you to kind of get that darkness recognized and give it a job or give it a healthy thing to do so you don't have to make it weird.
Yeah, you
right?
Don't make it weird. I like that.
Like there's some place you can put it or deal with it in a way that you don't have to just like ignore it or not do anything, right? Like if you're super violent, you could be a butcher. And now it's helpful for everybody, right? Instead of weird.
Yeah, just John Wayne Gacy could have just been that clown and knocked it off.
It's really true. Like there can be solutions if we do integration, right? But you have to have awareness to do that.
Something that I was thinking interesting is, when we're dealing with shadow work with Jung, we're also oftentimes dealing with dreams and dream work with Jung. And sometimes our dreams can hold more information than surface. It's like, I was swimming across the ocean. Well, I mean, gosh, man, that's full of a whole sorts of symbols. It's not just you swimming across the ocean, but you can take it as that. But there's something going on. And I thought about looking through this. I mean, there's another guy, he's got a deck. He calls it an oracle, that Dr. Greg Marr. He's got an oracle deck where you basically have a dream, and then whatever symbols is in the dream, you can pull the card out and look at some of the stuff that might jog your memory. But with your deck here and some of this, how to use it, I was almost expecting like a normal like layout, but I'm like looking at it going, you've done something here that's really interesting. And I'm kind of curious is if you can talk, I mean, obviously we can't like show pictures, but tell me basically about the secret shadow method and an example with cards or something.
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
Favorites.
So we'll do an example. I'll say like, how about, maybe we can pick like a world thing that's going on or something. So, or maybe like UFOs. So we'll pick a shadow on what is the most prominent shadow for our government and UFOs. Straightforward question, right? So I'll pick one card for that prominent shadow and then one for the secret shadow. Right? So that is kind of like Inception, where we're going to go through some layers. Okay. We're going to Inception the shadow to get down a level deeper. Right. Okay. So I'm going to see the first card that we pull. This is very interesting, is Ego Wound. Ego Wound is the 9 of Wands, right? And in the image, there's a kind of face with a face on top of it that's hiding. So our ego is our identity. So this is a hidden identity that's trying to mask with the ego wound. So if we're asking if that's the shadow of the UFOs, they don't want people to identify, right, with aliens, or that aliens are part of our culture. Even though it's so dumb because it totally happens, right? It's happening anyway, but that perhaps that's part of who we are aliens, and that there's some mystery there surrounding our identity. If it's an ego wound, that means the answer is kind of that we might be aliens, is what I'm getting. Yeah.
And then what would because then you would put another card as the
Correct.
Secret one.
So,
and what would we do
for
with
the
that?
secret?
For this example.
For the secret shadow. So we're looking at, okay, if our shadow for UFOs and the government is identity related, and that we might be aliens, basically, is what it's saying. So then we're going to go a level deeper, and we're going to say, what is the source of that shadow that developed, right? Like in terms of hiding it, or, something like that. The secret shadow we get is annihilation, which is the 10 of Swords. It's a totally destructive shadow. So this would even speak to maybe there was a race of us that got annihilated and wiped out, or that somehow that history was completely wiped out, right? Annihilation is a total fail, total removal. Yeah. 10 of Swords in the regular tarot deck, for those of you guys that know, shows a person who's on the ground bleeding to death with swords in his back, right? Complete defeat. So if we have lost connection to our identity as aliens, that came from a complete eradication of that history or that race, right? So that's how you could use a secret shadow.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, if we kind of talk on that line for just a little bit, because I'm going to have to pull on that thread. So as we looked at earlier, we were talking about, entities like the Rephaim being a pre-human kind of like a thing, or maybe a concurrent human thing or twisted human thing, whatever. There's all sorts of opinions on that. Okay. On that line, and we're looking at this idea in the beginning is, if one reads the Hebrew the way it's done out, Bereshit, right, with a bet. Well, if somebody was talking about if you change that bet and put an LF, because A is actually the start of the alphabet, not a B, it would actually change the whole entire system. The whole entire first verse would be like the father of the beginnings. Right, Abba Rashid, which is father of the beginnings. So basically what we're doing is we're taking, in that idea, he's not taking nothingness, right? He's not taking something that doesn't, he's taking something that already existed but has been destroyed in a way and reforming it in a new image. And so that's kind of that falling on that annihilationism idea.
Yeah, there's another interpretation I had read that it's B, comma, Reshith. And Reshith is begin at the head, literally like the start. And the B before it, actually, this was from a scholar that I was, a Hebrew scholar, is begin again. Like you said, which is inferring that this isn't our first rodeo, that this is another time round the rodeo. So the B, Reshith, is it's like a recapitulation rather than beginning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Taking the nuclearly destroyed planet and making it
that's right.
whole again, kind of thing. It's kind of an interesting idea being, it's like if we're the aliens to the situation, that means L. Ron Hubbard was right.
No.
You know what I mean?
The horror.
Right. Well, so when we're looking at many of the esoteric and psychological traditions that emphasize that what we've repressed often returns with a greater force. So the more we repress it, the more likely it's going to come out in like the subtle ways. Like you said, if you've got an issue with like anger or aggression, you may be very sarcastic. That's kind of the way anger comes out. And so if you see these, how do you see these suppressed emotions or denied flaws dealing with, or for people to deal with, in order to become a little bit more integrated?
It's again, like, it's so hard because let's say we're in an intimate relationship with someone we care about. Okay. You're going to see their shadows come out in these like side of the mouth behaviors constantly, whether it's your romantic partner or your family members. The sarcasm is real, right? And it's a condescension, and it can create contempt, right? Which of course is the strangler of everything. In interpersonal relationships, once there's contempt from disrespect, right? So these behaviors have to get raised into awareness because they will try to annihilate the other's ego, right? So we'll engage in, or they become self-deprecating so that your self-esteem is so low the other person can't be in a relationship with you because you're just always like ruining yourself, right? So it'll either go onto them or onto the self. It's one or the other, right? We can see with comedians, they're either going to make fun of the audience or they're going to make fun of themselves, or both, right? So it's going to go somewhere, right? So if we try, though, to raise awareness that somebody's doing a shadow behavior, like trying to humiliate you, for example, right? Somebody's just going to try to humiliate you because they can't deal with what's happening in their life or whatever. They're seeking retribution for something. Who knows? Whether it's justified or not, still an inappropriate behavior. So you're going to try to call it to their awareness. Immediately, they're going to do what's called Darvo, right? Defend. Yeah,
Narcissist.
they're going to flip the script. They're going to defend themselves because they're going to feel attacked. This is the person that punches you in the face and then sues you for breaking their hand, right? So the ego is going to defend itself. So this is the number one thing we have to know when we're trying to deal with shadow. And it will defend if you're trying to do your shadow work. You're going to come up with reasons why it's not true. I'm not a bad person. The first thing you're going to hear from anybody when confronted with accountability is, I'm a good person, including yourself. So how do we get around the ego to raise the awareness to the shadow? This is a lot. Kind of got to be a little non-confrontational, because if you confront it directly, it's going to be a fight, right? You can't just dive in there. Trust me, I try all the time. Sometimes you can do it if it's funny, or I try doing reverso changeo, where I say my bad behavior and then they can laugh and they kind of feel better about confessing their own, because they can feel safe to be vulnerable, right? Because I can easily list like 10 shadows I have off the top of my head at any moment. So, because I'm doing this work all the time. So if you can do a sacrifice, self-sacrifice, that's one way. If you feel comfortable, you can kind of make it funny is another way, right? If you're trying to do it for yourself, you have to use those things as well, where you have to kind of take the piss out of it, and be a little funny about it. Helps, where you can view yourself with a sense of compassion, humor, humility, right? If we take ourselves too seriously and get up on that high horse, you're never going to do shadow work, because you're going to avoid it like the plague. All these people that build up personas higher and higher, they will not apologize. You cannot get accountability. You're going to avoid accountability forever and ever.
Yeah, that Darvo thing belongs to more than just narcissists.
It's so common.
Realize that.
Yeah,
because it's the ego.
In your household, man. It's not just in.
Yeah.
Oh,
you'll do it to yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Something that I was thinking about in this same thing is when people basically find themselves kind of, between a rock and a hard place, these negative things happen and it drops them down really low in some kind of emotional state or something like that. Just drops them really low, the depression stuff hits, whatever it could be. Something bad happens. And it's kind of an interesting look at this, because some people, and this happens in Christianity, where it's like they've hit the wall and they've bottomed out and now they're praying. Well, this also happens within, non-Christian groups, within pagan circles, where, they'd be like, I identify with this particular thing, but I'm not doing the thing every day. I just go to it when I'm in a period of crisis or during an identity collapse. And so I'm kind of curious on your take if this is kind of basically a psychological pattern seeking, right? So they're just doing anything they can to kind of get some kind of dopamine, or is this a different and a deeper kind of human suffering that might be part of our collective unconscious?
I mean, I think
shadow?
It's both for sure. Yeah. The suffering, we'll seek it out. So we have healing instincts and we also have death instincts. We have both, right? So we'll follow both of them at different times. It's, when we have groups that we'll do, I'll see people get, you've seen Fight Club, people get addicted to going to these ritualized suffering sharing, right? The trauma dumps is like going to the bacchanalia almost, where it's so indulgent, right? So indulgent. And that is serving a need for misery that we have. Like we one of the things I mentioned in the book is that the majority of shadow behaviors are born out of needs and unmet needs, where it's like, I needed someone to care about me and they didn't, or I needed food and nobody fed me, or like I wanted romance and there was nothing, or like I need to feel okay and you don't feel okay. So that's going to rise up one of these chthonic titans in the place of the unmet need that is going to start to become a possibly habituated activity, or, you know, some kind of coping mechanism for the unmet need, right? So many of these shadow behaviors are like coping mechanisms for the unmet need. If someone's a rageaholic, that's coming out of an unmet need that then became habituated into this, expression that cycles. So when we go to these prayer groups or whatever, it's also a way that with those groups you were mentioning somehow too, it is also a way that we can feel in control. Because now we're the ones steering the ship here, because we're praying for this and engaging it in a way that's under our control and as part of this group, and there's structure and there's boundaries and there's delineations of it. So it's a kind of way to place a framework onto a very chaotic, unknown feeling, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, a lot of these shadow self things, right? These different things, whatever they could be, really seem to be birthed by fears, right? Like you said, an unmet need can develop into a thing, into a particular behavior. Well, that's, an unmet need is typically a fear of not having something. And so if that's true, how would shadow explorations expose the way these kinds of fears that develop into these behaviors help us to kind of, honestly, I'm going to use it, control ourselves a little bit better?
I've seen exactly how it helps, and it's because you can just confess. The power of confession is very real in most religions for a reason, is if you just admit it, right? Don't hide it is how it goes. So you can say, I'm scared. You have to be vulnerable. The vulnerability is what takes the power out of the shadow. When we try to hide it or mask it or pretend otherwise that we don't have those feelings or those aren't there, and then the repression starts, right? If we can do the shadow work, identify the feeling, see what the need is, and just like confess it, it kind of like tears the rock up from the ground so all the bugs can scatter. So we can say these things and it makes other people feel better in their fears too. It acts kind of like an exorcism when we can be in the middle of a situation, maybe even with other people, and we could just be like, I'm really freaked out, or say like, wow, this is intense, or make some kind of self-sacrificial announcement. We don't have to go overboard, but we can even internally recognize it and be like, I am scared. This is scary. I feel fear. So it's about acknowledging that part of yourself that feels vulnerable, or being like, this is making me uncomfortable, or like, I don't like this, or like, I hate this person. When you're sitting there having to deal with them, you could be like, I really hate this person. And just be like, wow, yes, I do. That's true. It doesn't say anything about the person, but you're taking responsibility for your feelings, your emotions. And you're not trying to like say that's a bad person. Instead, you're saying, I don't like this person, which is a big difference, right? Call it out. Call it out.
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is what I like about the use of oracle style cards that are designed to help the mind grasp what's going on. So I put your cards here with that. They're really trying to help grasp the mind. I'm not trying to see the future.
divination or whatever.
Yes,
I'm just trying to understand what's going on.
Yes.
And specifically with myself. Right. It's with myself. I mean, this is all I got to work with. I don't need to work on anybody else. But when we're doing this and we're working on ourselves, and I'm thinking about how it is that we are confronted with something and we remember why, right? How much healing can happen, or what kind of healing can happen when we look back and we go, this is the reason why I'm like this. It was, I was left in my crib while I was crying my eyes out, as the most weirdest, extremist example I've heard from somebody. That's why I am clingy.
How did they know that?
Anyways,
were they told by their mother?
Right, exactly. Because that's kind of like one of those things you're not going to really remember. But, when we're dealing with our shadow self, we're dealing with these things that are causing us, and we start remembering kind of why we might be that way. How is it we should interact with that? Because if we're going, this is the thing that triggered it, now we identify with it, and now that becomes kind of like another personality, really.
Yeah, it sure does. We have a lot of them. We have to accept all the different personalities is really the thing. And one of the things I state a lot, both in this deck and in my astrology book, is like, include more personalities. We tend to get the ego. To me, I view the ego as like a closing of an aperture where you're going into a smallness, right? So our ego is going to become really defensive and small when it thinks it's this thing and it can't include any other things because it's just this, right? It's like, I'm this, and it's going to remove all of those other possibilities for things it can be. What a strange choice, right? Wouldn't you want to be bigger and greater and grander? You would think like the bigger the ego, it would be more inclusive, but no, it gets so much more specific. That when the ego advances, the person has like a very specific wardrobe. They always do. Their haircut's always the same. They don't change. They always wear the same cowboy boots, or they always, right? Their persona becomes habituated into a singularity, into a single point. And that does not include any growth for any other possible personas to come in. So in doing shadow work is great because we can be more inclusive and then grow ourselves larger than what we were. Yes, that's going to come at the expense of an ego death, right? So it's going to be uncomfortable, especially if you have formed a persona that you really liked, or you felt like was like a badass, right? Or is like impressive or something, right? And you can think of any celebrity and watch how they don't change versus some celebrities that will mix it up and they can grow and shift. You can see the different kinds. You know what I'm talking about? Like when we get fixed into some personas, we just kind of, and you can, argue whatever, like you are who you are. Do you really have to change or whatever? But I mean, I think it's significant. It doesn't have to be an outward, like in your appearance. That's just an example, but you keep talking about the same things. In my industry, us that do readings for people, we call it looping on tape loops, where some of our clients, they don't say new stuff. They're saying the same thing for like 5 years. It's the same story. A lot of people have family members like this, where if you're like, what's up? And then they're going to start in on a tape loop because they got no growth, man. Nothing has expanded them or extended their horizon. And they've collapsed into that ego point.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that because with ADHD, you don't do that to a person with ADHD because they're never going to talk to you again. It's like you don't engage with somebody. It's like you can't. It's like there's no novelty in you. Yeah, there's no novelty in that person. And you're like, I'm gone, Well, I just wanted to flip through the book here. I flipped through randomly, and this is kind of an interesting thing because I love reading Robert Heinlein. And so I ended on this, the Six of Cups, the spoiled brat. And I thought this was kind of really funny because dude's like, most gods have like the mannerisms of a child. child, at the end of the day when you're looking at all of the data and stuff. So just tell me about this card specifically and some of the ideas that went into it. Because like I said, if you're just looking at the Rider-Waite deck or the Thought deck or any of these others, I wouldn't have come up with this, right? I wouldn't be able to think this is the opposite, right? So you did.
Yeah, well,
tell
for
me about
people,
that
if you see the
process.
card is these two children, and one of the boys giving the girl these flowers. He's a very generous child. It's very kind, right? It's very nice. But many children would want to keep those flowers for themselves and be like, this is mine. And they won't share. They have problems with sharing because they're spoiled brats that can kind of go that way. I feel like all children, including myself, although everybody has different natures, maybe some children are very pleasant. Of course, my children are angels. Everybody says that, right?
Of course they are.
But where children are like these wild jackals that you kind of have to wrangle together like dingoes, because they just are like the pure raw form of Titanic experience, where they're just like hungry or tired, or like it gets very like simple, but also they can just be like terrors, like in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? I really, when I was looking at that card, I was like, well, what's an example of that? And I really thought of like Veruca Salt or something, where it's this kind of, when that childhood innocence goes into a terror, it's because someone has been entitled or just has no awareness of other people's needs, which of course most children will not have any awareness of anyone's needs for themselves. That's like their job as a child is to just have their own needs for, general first world problems. But when they get spoiled, there's no compassion, and now they're just like a terror, just wanting things. And that becomes grownups that behave in that same way, right? If we are unreared, which is a big problem, right? I'm from the 90s, latchkey kid. There's a whole generation of us that had to figure out on our own. But then I feel like some of these newer generations, when they experience this lack of rearing, they don't ever get it anywhere. And so they have no emotional education. They have no emotional intelligence. The humanities get removed from a lot of schools. Decrease reading novels and educating people in that kind of humanitarian way, you're going to end up with a lot of spoiled brats, it turns out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You brought up Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because I have actually been looking at that movie, specifically Gene Wilder's, not Johnny Depp's, even though I love Depp. Gene Wilder's, because it kind of just seems to be the really good classic, because all the characters are so easily identifiable in a Jungian way. And since you brought that up, I thought that was really funny, because you've got like Augustus. He's that consumption without restraint, right? He's the devouring self. And then you mentioned the one who the entitlement kid, Salt, and you're like looking at all these people. And what I was doing was, I was looking at Charlie and going, what if as an example, what if all these kids, what if the whole thing is just like a dream? First of all, he's dreaming. And so all of these kids are illusions of him, representations of himself, his shadow self. And so if all of these kids mean something, you get all the way to the end with Charlie, Charlie Bucket? Is that right? Who's the integrated innocence, the redeemable self. And I think that was really an interesting thing when I started looking at Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and what was going on with that as a potential for like shadow stuff. So it was really interesting you brought that up, because you said something that triggered and made me pull out a file from my filing cabinet. Right. Well, I said ADHD. You said something that triggered me, so I was able to talk about it for a second. But anyways, when you look at those kinds of things, because that's something that people can then grasp a hold of. When we look at other things, when we look at film, television stars, actors, like you said, they seem to be a persona, right? I mean, everybody seems to be lately a persona, and sometimes their personas cause their death. It's my honest opinion that Robin Williams and his suicide was because of he was supposed to be the clown, the sad clown, excuse me, and Heath Ledger. I mean, it was just an interesting thing that people kind of get put in these character roles, and instead of an ego death,
because
they die.
When that aperture closes and it comes to the singularity point, right? This is very common that I see with people suffering from suicide as well. They can't see any other option. There's no way out. This version of me, this ego has failed. It's over. There's no redemption for this persona. And they can't expand to include other personas. And so that ego views itself as a failure and cannot see any other possibility or growth. So that is a complete contraction of the aperture. It can no longer see itself as anything other. And society won't let you, right? If you're a persona that is in everybody's eye, they hate it if you try to change. That makes them feel uncomfortable. Like, who is this person now? I thought you were this. And they typecast you, right? So if you get fame or awareness in a population, even in your family, if you try to switch it up in your family and be something else, you get flack from your siblings, right? They're all like, who do you think you are, or whatever. People like very much for you to stay contained in that box where they can understand who or what you are. And if you go through, this is why a lot of people that experience, spiritual awakenings will join a cult and leave their family because they can no longer relate to their family. And now they have a new identity and a new persona. So they have to hang out with those people that accept that persona and its change and growth. And now they have an enemy of their family, but it's really the enemy is their old self and their old ego that they have outgrown and they can no longer return to, right? So these ego expansions come at a cost of who your friends are. If they can't grow with you, right? If you're in a relationship and the person's very uncomfortable that you somehow got like an amazing job that like now makes them feel diminished, you're going to have not just an ego death, but now we do what I call the dispersion, right? Where it's like if you blow on a dandelion and all the seeds go everywhere, right? So a lot of times when you have an ego death, you will also experience a dispersion because of anyone that cannot accommodate your growth and leave your old self behind will also be dispersed.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of that. That's that, individuals who they gather people around who they can be more popular than. That's kind of a thing that happens. I mean, gosh, how high school is that, right? You just get those people around you that you're more popular. And then when one of those people actually ends up being liked way more than you, it's like, I don't want anything to do with them. You start pushing them away from you and things like that. It's kind of
it's a Darbo, what do they call it in the psychology
really
terms? They call it the army of winged monkeys, right? Where the wicked witch has her mean girl tribe that does whatever she says. But if one of the chicks has their own thing, they're out because they're a threat, right? It's like control. Yeah.
Right. It's control. That's the negative concept of control. Fantastic. Let's see. You talked about you do readings for people. I mean, talk about that for a few minutes and then we'll wrap.
I've been doing readings for people. Oh my goodness. I think like 25 years of tarot. I mean, I got my deck my mom gave me when I was 15. So, and started reading about astrology and stuff as a teenager. So was doing it, just for fun and education for myself for longer than that even. But I began, I have a psychology degree in transformational psychology. So the way that I approach sessions is to use the tarot, the I Ching, and astrology as tools to try to gain insight on whatever the person is dealing with. So I have had success with like future predictions, especially with the astrology, because it's more like well, at this time, here's what the energy is going to be. And the astrology time frames are pretty accurate, I find. So like if you like have Aries on your 10th house right now, guess what? You're going to have a lot of stuff going on in your work, maybe change of job, advancement. This is 100% happening for people because every planet's in Aries, right? So you can just tell where stuff is going to occur with the astrology. So I have pretty good luck with that. But with the rest of the stuff, I try to get insight on like, why is this problem happening and how can you manage it, deal with it, let it go? What has to happen here rather than just saying, is this my boyfriend? Am I going to be rich? Like, I don't deal with those kind of questions. I'm like trying to actually be pragmatic with people and see like, well, let's see what is the path that you would need to accomplish that target, right? And so those kind of approaches work actually very well, I find, to get some kind of movement, especially when people are stuck or dealing with terrible things that they can't wrap their brain around for like, what am I supposed to do here? You know what I mean? What is this? Like, what is happening? So I try to work a little like Nancy Drew and get insight and data so people can make better decisions.
Yeah, it sounds, honestly, I mean, it sounds like a form of narrative therapy. You've taken something that's external to the person and made that the thing that's the problem outside of them. Exactly. So that they can look at it.
Yes.
It's kind of basically what it is. Fantastic. If you can go ahead and once again leave your information, websites, etc., and things like that. I mean, obviously you're not on social media, so don't even worry about dropping that nonsense.
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. My website is witchofthedawn.com, and my email is maja@godismyboyfriend.com. If people want to reach out with an email, or you can see some of my stuff online. I also have a bunch of my lectures that I did years ago at the Besant Lodge, listed for free on my YouTube channel. People can go watch those. I tried to, include a bunch of information about esoteric research that I would just share all the time. So, yeah.
Well, Maja, I really want to thank you for coming on my show and talking to me about these things.
It was my pleasure. So fun. Like, this was great. Yeah.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The terrible thing about searching for the truth is that sometimes you find it.
You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere.
Protecting your peace isn't about shutting the world out. It's about keeping your inner world clear enough to hear your own soul.
The truth, nothing more.